Right, we now come to the urgent question. Paul Holmes.
Mr. Speaker, to ask the Foreign Secretary if he will make a statement on the new immigration arrangements between the UK Government and St Helena.
Minister,
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. And I've been asked to reply as the Minister for the Overseas Territories, and I know these are issues of keen interest to you, Mr. Speaker, as well. The House is, of course, aware that a political agreement has been reached with Mauritius about the long-term future for the British Indian Ocean Territory. Once any treaty with Mauritius comes into force, following, of course, its proper parliamentary scrutiny, Mauritius will be responsible for any migrants that arrived there. However, we needed to find an interim contingency solution for the period before that agreement comes into force. Mr. Speaker, given that there is no permanent population, Biot has never been an appropriate long-term location for migrants due to the logistical challenges of providing appropriate care in such a remote place without civilian infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, on the 15th of October, a new memorandum of understanding was reached with the Government of St Helena that any new migrants arriving in the interim period will be transferred to St Helena, and the intention is for that agreement to last until the treaty with Mauritius comes into force, recalling, Mr. Speaker, that in practice no new migrants have arrived on Diego Garcia since 2022. And Mr. Speaker, can I say that we are hugely grateful to the St Helena government for their assistance, and their Chief Minister has said, and I quote, "This arrangement presents a unique opportunity for St Helena, a British overseas territory, to be in a position to assist the UK, and we are pleased to be able to work in close partnership with the UK government towards a mutually beneficial solution." And Mr. Speaker, the UK Government has agreed to provide one-off funding of £6.65 million to St Helena to improve health and education outcomes and upgrade government infrastructure. And this is consistent with our long-term support to the local community in St Helena, which is, of course, crucially important. This is a long-term and consistent partnership. And we will support St Helena by providing technical support and indeed funding the transfer and subsistence costs for any migrants affected. This is, of course, Mr. Speaker, not the first time that St Helena have supported the wider UK family, and this agreement is testament to their integral place in our family, and we thank them for their support.
Paul Holmes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for granting this urgent question, and I must say I am disappointed that once again this government has chosen to make an important announcement outside of this House and not within the House, as should be the case. Following on from the shameful decision of this government to fast-track and capitulate in negotiations to hand over the British Indian Ocean Territory to Mauritius, it is clear that this policy announced over the weekend is a rushed consequence of a deal that does not serve British taxpayers well, and an aspect of a deal that has not been properly scrutinised by this House, with no announcement on how we will scrutinise the wider issue of the transfer of sovereignty of the Indian Ocean Territory to another country. I would like to ask the Minister, during the negotiations of the treaty concerning the overseas territory, did this plan form part of negotiation discussions, and why, if this government was so keen on signing away sovereignty, did this not form part of the deal for Mauritius to take responsibility for these illegal migrants and take them to Mauritius from day one? I would also like to ask if Chagossians were consulted on this plan, as despite the Foreign Secretary saying they were updated throughout, parliamentary questions have since revealed this not to be the case. So what consultations have they had in this regard? Finally, I would like to ask the Minister how much this deal will cost and what department will be responsible. Will this be a drawdown of Treasury funds, or will it come from FCDO budgets? And will this cost be added to the overall costs estimated for the sovereignty deal with Mauritius? Mr. Speaker, can I ask whether this now signifies a change of heart on offshoring as a policy as a whole, considering that during the general election the party opposite called offshoring immoral, and before Labour MPs stand up opposite to espouse how good this deal is, they should remind themselves that they wrote in their leaflets that offshoring of British citizens is immoral. Does this now represent a change of policy from this government?
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm sorry that the honourable gentleman has taken the tone that he has. I set out very clearly, actually, the answers to a number of the points that he raised in his intervention in my statement. It's also been set out very, very clearly by the St Helena government. They've indicated their full agreement with this. In fact, they were fully part of this process and there was full consultation with them. This is a mutual, beneficial win-win agreement for the UK government and St Helena. And the Chief Minister has said, as I said, that St Helena is in a unique position to be able to help the UK government, and this will strengthen the reputation and enhance their partnership within the British family. Now, he asked a lot of questions about the arrangements with Mauritius. The Foreign Secretary answered at great length about the arrangements with BIOT. Though that agreement will go through this House in the proper way, as has been set out, and will face the proper parliamentary scrutiny, and I'm sure it will attract scrutiny, and that's only right. This is an agreement, specifically a contingency agreement, to deal with the situation that I explained, which is the period before any agreement with Mauritius comes into place, because, of course, they will then take any migrants. The situation on BIOT is not suitable long-term for migrants to be present. We've explained that at great length. I have to say, Mr Speaker, we as a government came in and inherited, quite frankly, a mess over this situation. And what we are doing is taking pragmatic, sensible and proactive measures to address the situation. I am hugely grateful for St Helena for the role that they're playing in relation to this. This is a mutual beneficial win-win situation. And the funds, he asked where those will come from. They are coming from the Foreign and Commonwealth and Development Office. We have a long-term established partnership with St Helena in these areas already. They have hugely welcomed this. This will help them deal with a number of ongoing issues, and I have set out the details fully. The information is also fully available from the St Helena government as well, including the full details of the agreement.
Dame Meg Hillier.
Mr Speaker, it's welcome to hear St Helena mentioned in this House, and this money that's going to them amounts to about a 20% increase in financial aid from the UK this year, which is sorely needed in a community that is so challenged. Would the Minister explain, though, the challenge of how you get people from, how he will get people from the British Indian Overseas Territories, if they were to arrive, to St Helena, given the very challenging travel aspects there, and what conversations he's had with the Chief Minister and her ministers about where these people will be accommodated if they arrive?
I thank my right honourable friend for her interest in St Helena, which has been long-standing, and I understand she herself visited recently, and I really welcome her ongoing engagement with the people and the government there. We have made clear that we would support the transfer of anybody who did arrive, but let me reiterate, nobody has actually arrived on BIOT since 2022. This is a contingency measure only, and of course it is not a safe place for people to attempt to go to. So this is about closing down that route and making sure that in the event that anybody did attend, that they were able to go to a safe place and be properly supported. And the St Helena government has made clear how they would accommodate and integrate people in that community.
Shadow Foreign Secretary Andrew Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you to my honourable friend for raising this important matter. The whole House, Mr Speaker, will welcome the government's sudden conversion to offshoring, even though it was not announced in this House in accordance with your specific instructions, Mr Speaker. I believe I may, along with the Right Honourable Lady, be one of the only members of this House to have had the privilege of visiting St Helena, and, of course, you, Mr Speaker, to survey the island's new airport. This will in time relieve the British taxpayer of cost and open up the island to a very bright future with connectively massively enhancing. While there, Mr Speaker, I met the oldest mammal on the planet, born a few years after Napoleon's death, Jonathan the tortoise. I also visited the island's impressive hospital, which provides very good healthcare. But it is a small facility, and its function has been specifically tailored to serve the commensurately small community of St Helena. The cohort of people who might arrive from Diego Garcia are likely to have medical needs. Indeed, experience shows quite complex medical needs. That will place additional weight on the St Helena's healthcare infrastructure. So what is the Minister going to do to help St Helena specifically in respect of that? There is some disquiet from residents of St Helena that an influx of migrants could adversely impact what is a very tight-knit local community in terms of social cohesion and social provision. What is the estimated number of migrants that will be sent to St Helena? Bearing in mind that the entire population is less than 5,000, will he be imposing an admittedly low but nevertheless a limit? And has he made an assessment of how much this transfer policy will cost the British taxpayer? On these benches, of course, we do not oppose the principle of offshoring, but we are perplexed by the government's choice of destination, a small British overseas territory which is thousands of miles from Diego Garcia, not least because a number of asylum seekers who landed on the British Indian Ocean territory have already been transferred to Rwanda. Labour has, of course, scrapped the Rwanda scheme, so can the Minister tell the House whether the government's approach has now changed, and does the government welcome offshoring as a means of injecting deterrence within the complexities of illegal migration?
Well, I thank the right honourable gentleman for his comments and questions, and I know he's always taken a keen interest in the overseas territories and indeed in St Helena in particular. I mean, I do have to say, Mr Speaker, that I am surprised that he is perplexed because, of course, he and his fellow ministers were grappling with these very decisions and issues in the last government, and what we are doing is providing pragmatic and practical solutions to respond to the situation that we inherited. There is no comparison with the Rwanda scheme. You'll have just heard the Home Secretary speaking, Mr Speaker. That was £700 million of taxpayers' money, resulting in 4 volunteers. This is a mutually beneficial win-win agreement agreed between the United Kingdom and one of our overseas territories. I've set out very clearly how much it costs: £6.65 million for the contingency arrangement, and then the costs of anybody who does come. But let me be clear, Mr Speaker, and I'll reiterate this again for the House's benefit. No migrants have actually arrived on Bayat since 2022. This is a contingency arrangement which is absolutely necessary, but of course we hope that nobody will choose to make that dangerous route. He absolutely quite rightly points out the situation on healthcare on St Helena, and that is exactly why it is a more suitable location for any theoretical migrants to be relocated to, because of course those facilities do not exist to that level on Bayat. And he mentions alleged disquiet in St Helena. This is simply not the case. I read out very, very clearly what the government have said, what the Chief Minister has said, and there are huge benefits in this. And may I say, lastly, Mr Speaker, St Helena is a wonderful place. I haven't had a chance to visit, but I have had the chance to experience their wonderful culture, their food, and their people, and I'm looking forward to welcoming the Chief Minister here to the Joint Ministerial Council in due course.
Oliver Wright.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I wonder whether the Minister agrees with me that any comparison between this scheme and the Rwanda scheme, and I'm interested to hear the sort of rebranding of offshoring as opposed to Rwanda, which was a huge failure, is rubbish on the basis that it cost £700 million and sent 4 volunteers there, whereas this is a far better scheme. Thank you.
Well, my honourable friend makes the point for himself in his question. There is no comparison. This is a mutually beneficial win-win agreement between us and St Helena. The other scheme, £700 million, 4 volunteers. There is no comparison.
We come to Liberal Democrat spokesperson James McCleary.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Liberal Democrats have already put on record our concerns about the deal that was struck with Mauritius and how it excluded the voices of Chagosians. We also have concerns about the terms of this agreement. What will happen to the individuals who have been moved to St Helena after the 18-month period elapses? We cannot just abandon them. Will the Minister update the House on what will happen if an agreement with Mauritius has not been reached by the end of the 18-month period? And can the Minister also update the House on those asylum seekers who have previously been detained on Diego Garcia, such as the 60 Sri Lankan Tamils? They are not covered within the scope of the agreement. Will the government be supporting those individuals in claiming asylum where they need it? And finally, it has been reported today that there is an investigation underway into a major hack of the British Commission's phones during the Chagos Island talks. What action is the government taking to address this potentially major security breach?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his questions, and as I said, the Foreign Secretary answered at length questions regarding the overall agreement with Mauritius with regard to Bayat earlier on, but he asked for some further details of the arrangement with St Helena, and under the arrangement, if any migrants arrived on Bayat in the future, they would be transferred to St Helena. They would have also, of course, remain free to depart or return to their countries of origin. They would not be able to stay on Bayat. St Helena would take responsibility for accommodating those individuals and, if appropriate, processing asylum claims. He mentions the issues regarding the existing migrants on the island. They're not included in this arrangement, and we continue to work, Mr Speaker, at pace to find long-term, durable solutions. I won't go into details. It would be inappropriate to do so given the legal complexities regarding the individuals and the small group who are there. In regard to the points he raised about in the media, alleged hacks, those are subject to an ongoing police investigation in in Mauritius, so I don't want to comment, but my understanding is they're historic rather than relating to the recent negotiation period.
Scott Arthur.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I really welcome the statement and the clarity that has come with it. Can you outline ultimately who will be responsible for these people when they find themselves in St Helena? Thank you.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his question. Fundamentally, it would be for any theoretical migrants who did arrive as a result of this agreement that St Helena has agreed to take responsibility for those. But I would draw him back to what I said earlier on, which is, of course, that in terms of the treaty that we seek to finalise with Mauritius following parliamentary scrutiny, that, of course, Mauritius would take responsibility for any migrants that arrived after the agreement of that treaty.
Andrew Rossen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister really should understand that the British Overseas Territories are self-governing democracies and they must make decisions about their own island's governance. So has the Legislative Council of St Helena voted in favour of this? Have the people of St Helena been consulted on this? What impact will this influx of people potentially have on this small island territory of only 4,500 people? And will this have any impact on Tristan da Cunha and Ascension Island, which he will know forms part of the overall British Overseas Territory?
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for his question. I know he takes a very keen interest. We've discussed the overseas territories on many occasions, and he knows how seriously I take their democracy and autonomy. And that's why it's important to reiterate to the House that this was an agreement freely entered into by the Government of St Helena. They have publicly welcomed it profusely and have explained why it's beneficial. Obviously, they're responsible for their own processes internally within St Helena. We're going to continue to work with the Government and their representatives, indeed with their Attorney General as well, as we move forward with that agreement. And if he may, I will come back to him about the point he raised about Tristan and Ascension, but this is primarily about St Helena because of the facilities that are available there.
Lynn Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Minister agree with me that the UK's new agreement with Mauritius will close a potentially dangerous illegal migrant route?
I thank my honourable friend, and she is right. This is not, the Bart is not a suitable place for migrants to be present. There is no permanent population. There are not the education and health facilities that are necessary, and that's why we needed to put in place not only part of our agreement with Mauritius to ensure that issue was dealt with, but also that in terms of the interim period, this contingency period, that we had a place were any migrants to arrive, and as I said, none have arrived since 2022, that they could go to a place where there were hospitals, education, an economy and a community to support them, and that's why we thank St Helena for their help in this matter.
Far in the House, Redmond Lee.
If it's possible legally to deport illegal migrants from Diego Garcia to St Helena, is there any legal reason why we can't deport illegal migrants landing on these shores to St Helena or any other overseas territory? Is it because, as a former Home Secretary told me quite recently, it is because after 5 years they would acquire rights to British citizenship?
Well, we're absolutely confident that this agreement is compliant with international law, and we're going to be working closely with the Attorney General of St Helena to ensure that it's compliant with our law, with St Helena law, and all of our international obligations.
Chris Murray.
Does the Minister agree with me that the Government inherited a deeply troubling and complex situation for any migrants involved, which the last Government failed to resolve over a number of years, and we have now taken the decisive action that's needed to find an actual solution to this problem?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right, Mr. Speaker, and as I've set out, we inherited, quite frankly, a mess on some of these issues, and we are taking the pragmatic and practical steps to ensure that we have agreements that meet the needs going forward.
Sir Julian Lewis.
I accept what the Minister says, that there has been no immigration arrivals since 2022, but does he accept in turn that there's a danger of creating a pull factor?
Yeah.
And if that happens and a much larger number arrives than is expected, will he put a cap on the number that can be transferred to St Hillier?
But that, Mr. Speaker, is exactly why we have concluded the agreement that we have with Mauritius and this agreement with St Helena. Biot is not a suitable place for migrants to be present. There is no permanent population. There is not the suitable facilities. And that's absolutely why we're taking these steps to close down that route and ensure that people do not make that dangerous journey.
Luke Charles.
Minister confirmed that British sovereignty over the overseas territory is non-negotiable, and that actually comments from the party opposite are not only wrong but deeply irresponsible.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for that question, a very important point that he makes. I have made repeatedly clear, not least in the Falklands and Gibraltar, that we stand by their sovereignty and their self-determination and will defend them. And indeed that goes for the British Overseas Territories family, and it's a commitment that I will be making in person when the leaders join me at the Joint Ministerial Council in a few weeks' time.
Andrew Morrison. Dr. Andrew Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since no migrants have arrived in Biot since 2022, and given that this agreement lapses after 18 months, what's the problem the Minister is trying to solve? And given that Rwanda was apparently considered immoral and this isn't what he's doing simply to offer insult to Kigali?
Absolutely not. I mean, this is prudent contingency planning, and unfortunately we inherited a situation from the previous government where many holes had been left in these very arrangements and where there were significant problems, and we're taking steps now to pragmatically address that.
Jonathan Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the government's commitment to St Helena, but does he agree with me that comparisons that have been made throughout this urgent question with the Rwanda scheme are irresponsible and unhelpful? It cost £700 million and only sent 4 volunteers.
Mr. Speaker, as I've said, he is absolutely right. There is no comparison. £700 million, as the Home Secretary just set out, for 4 volunteers. You know, taxpayers' money being spent on that scheme. This is a sensible, win-win, beneficial agreement that benefits both the United Kingdom and St Helena and involves potentially very, very few people.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, could the Minister explain why the applications for refugee status made by people who've come to the British Indian Ocean Territories, as it's currently called, cannot be just processed now? And why is instead he taking them to St Helena? And will he guarantee that St Helena isn't going to become an offshore base for Britain to evade its international human rights obligations by simply sending large numbers of refugees there in the future?
Yeah. Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't agree with his characterisation of St Helena. It is a wonderful place with wonderful people and government, and they have voluntarily entered into this agreement. And it is obviously a much, much more suitable place for anybody, were they theoretically to arrive, than Biot, which is not suitable. I'm very confident that all of our processes are compliant with international law.
So Desmond Swain.
The opportunities available to any migrant are vastly greater in Rwanda, aren't they?
Why didn't they go?
I mean, as my right honourable friend says to me next to me, well, why didn't they go there? I mean, 4 people for 700 million. You know, this is an absurd comparison to make. We are taking pragmatic steps to address situations that we inherited from the previous government, and there is no comparison to be made between the situation in Rwanda and the situation in St Helena.
Lee Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If illegal migrants arriving in St Helena are granted asylum, does that mean they can then apply to come to the UK? And if so, is that not creating another market for the people smugglers?
Yeah. No, absolutely not. There is no automatic right for them to travel from St Helena to the UK. St Helena would undertake the processing of any of those cases in a proper way, and of course anybody who failed to get a positive decision would then be removed. So St Helena would process them. There is not an automatic right to come to the UK. As with any overseas territories, after a period of time, people can apply for British Overseas Territory citizenship, but it is not automatic.
Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister has repeated several times this afternoon that no migrants have gone to Biot in the last 2 years. He studiously avoided answering my right honourable friend, the Shadow Home Secretary's important question about how many migrants he's providing a contingency for. Because in order to calculate the 6.5 million, he must know how many are likely to go there or not, as the case might be. So will he now tell the House what that number is, and will he publish the full impact assessment?
Yeah.
Mr. Speaker, like many people, I don't have a crystal ball. Our expectation is based on the evidence that hopefully nobody would make that journey because it is dangerous and Barnet is not a suitable place for migrants. However, it is only right that we put in place contingency arrangements were somebody to do that before any treaty was concluded with Mauritius, who would then, of course, take the responsibility for dealing with any migrant arrivals after that. The 6.65 million figure is for health, it's for education, and it is to support separately, as part of the agreement we've come to with St Helena. Additional costs, if there were to be anybody, would obviously be negotiated on a case-by-case basis.
James Wild. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister says this deal will cost £6.65 million to taxpayers. So will he now be transparent with the House and say how much UK taxpayers will be paying to Mauritius in order that we can continue to use Diego Garcia, which he gave away?
The facts relating to the agreement with Mauritius will be set out in due course to the House following the proper parliamentary scrutiny. This is very specifically about this agreement with St Helena, and I've set out what the money will be used for and the amount.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the Minister very much for his answers to the questions. And can the Minister outline how the security of this airbase will be best served within this new management in place when we consider the amount of vetting, and it's a very key particular issue, that needs to be done for anyone seeking to enter a military base under regular circumstances, never mind in this situation? And what assurances do those military personnel hold that their safety is of importance to this government? Thank you so much.
Mr. Speaker, that my honourable friend may have been referring to Diego Garcia. Obviously, Diego Garcia is not a suitable place for migrants for the very reasons that he sets out. And of course, we have ensured that we've put that base on a secure long-term footing in the interests of UK and indeed the national security of our allies.
That completes the urgent question.
You all right?
Well, yeah.
Yeah.